For Democrats, this is a disaster. Today's final CPI report before the November 8 election, worst inflation in 4 decades. And it has to do with what happened in Wall Street. A financial nuke went off 8:30 in the morning when BLS reported a shocking CPI print, unexpectedly hot, a 2.9 sigma upside surprise or consent to consensus. And the result was absolute disaster, does not even begin to cut it. Andrew Brenner, head of international fixed income at Nat Alliance Security, said, horrible CPI number. What will the Fed do to interest rates? Will they go 100 basis points? Jim Quarren, Morgan Stanley investment manager, said it's brutal. I do think that prices will start to moderate. I thought that this would already be happening at this point, is what he told Bloomberg TV. The issue now is that inflation has moved from the goods sector and has permeated into the services sector. Chris Ansey, Bloomberg senior editor, says for Democrats this is a disaster. Today's is the final CPI report before the November 8th midterm election. If you can bet that Republicans will be hitting this hard. Worst inflation in 4 decades. Nick Timraus, Fed mouthpiece at Wall Street Journal, said, for the Fed, the September CPI report seals a case for a 4th consecutive 75 base point hike. It calls into question the model outlook for 3 weeks ago, and the Fed might be able to stop raising rates after 50 base points in December and 25 in February. Dennis de Boucher, founder of 22V Research, said this was clearly a bad number. It's just broad-based inflation is what it is. Need much more goods disinflated inflation to offset the high sticky parts of core. Seth Carpenter, chief global economist Morgan Stanley, said that this was clearly a shock for markets. If ever there's a time for people who do economic forecasting to be humbled, this is it. Steve Chiavarone, senior portfolio manager of Federated Hermes, said this report raises the risk that we may see a new cycle high in headline inflation before the end of the year, with energy prices moving back up, and the mid-90s oil price in December could see us surpass the 9.1% headline peak from June. Mona Mahajan, senior investment strategist at Edward Jones, says this print not only poses a challenge for the Fed, but also the broader economy. Inflation was supposed to be moderating, but instead we got a print that moved in the wrong direction. Michael Pierce, senior U.S. economist at Capital Economics, says there's still clear signs of disinflation everywhere else we look. The drop in used auto prices should continue to feed through. The survey evidence points to weakening price pressures, and the private sector measures of new rents points to an eventual sharp moderation in shelter inflation too, although that won't feed through in earnest until H1 of next year. Angelos Monalatos, U.S. and Canada interest rate strategist for Bloomberg Intelligence, calls today's report clearly a core service story. He said it's not just rent. Core services, excluding rents, is growing over 6.5% year over year, with no rent relief in the horizon. Core services prices gains will continue to underpin core inflation. Anna Wong, chief U.S. economist for Bloomberg Economics, says the September CPI print is not good, and even so, the subdued monthly headlines rates likely marks the best inflation news we will get for a while. With gasoline prices rising against OPEC Plus announced cuts, the core services inflation is still robust. The upside surprise in today's print, plus the unfavorable prints expected in coming months, will make it difficult for the Fed to communicate a downshift in the pace of the rate hikes in December. Mohamed El Arain, once again, he said hotter than expected U.S. inflation numbers for both the core and headline measures. Therefore, bad news for the Federal Reserve and markets, and more importantly, the economy, especially the most vulnerable segment of society. Oscar Munoz, U.S. macro strategist at TD Security, says, I do not think this changes much for the Fed, just that it lowers the idea of Fed pivot. They're likely to continue hiking at large 75 base points clip in November and increases the risk of another 75 base point for December, though we're of the view that they will do 50 base points as they get further into restrictive policy territory. They will become less hawkish in terms of the pace of rate increases, given they have hiked so much this past year and rising concerns about financial stability. And now we sit back and wait for something to break. And this is on Zero Hedge. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.